Victoria's taken a hit. Is it going to come back? I really don't know.
It's not just the venues, in my opinion. It's like the places like this where musicians go post band practice to kind of like scheme up how they're going to take over the world.
The starving artist is very romanticized too, but that's the first thing to go. And then after that, a city turns into a concrete jungle.
In the past year, restaurant and venue closures in Victoria have swept through the city, leaving everyone wondering what the heck is going on. But after the nightlife freeze of COVID and government supports basically drying up, the arts, culture, and hospitality sectors of Victoria are facing real challenges. In this episode of Island Sound and Story, I try to get to the bottom of it. First, I sit down with some of Victoria's most celebrated musicians, Art Deco and Laura from the band Miina. Check it out.
You do sacrifice a little bit staying on the island, but I think you get a lot as well.
Nothing feels better than like leaving and going out and exploring the world, and then nothing feels better than coming home.
Totally.
And home like is definitely where the heart is for us Islanders. Like I grew up here, spent some time in the Gulf Islands and in Vancouver, so I've been like most of my life sort of tethered to the Pacific Northwest, and it inspires a lot of creativity because just the beauty that you're surrounded with, and you take it for granted. Like how many times have you gone on tour and you forget like most, especially North America, looks nothing like this.
Yeah.
Like coming to the ocean and the mountain, you know, and that like fog that kind of settles in from the Pacific Northwest, and it's beautiful, and it inspires so much creativity. But it's also great to like go out and see the world. Yeah. So yeah, if you have to call a place home, in you know, what a treat to live here.
I think that Victoria has suffered a bit in terms of places for musicians to congregate and be able to share what they do on a couple of, like, it'd be nice to see a few different sizes of that offered too, whether you're starting out or whether you're a handful of years in, or etc. I would love to see more women in music, and I think that just comes from living, breathing music scene expanding and becoming more diverse, and then just it would be nice to see some more industry happening here too, just so that there's more opportunities for the artists that stay on the island to have a leg up to help them expand off of the island, streaming wise, physically, touring, etc., etc.
Growing up here, I couldn't wait to get as far away from Victoria as possible. I thought this place was like, and in the 90s, I'm 40 now, so I've got like a little bit of the pre-internet world, and then like the sort of like the boom of like social media and like the landscape now, and how that's all fed into like in parallel with like real estate becoming untenable for a lot of people, and I mean musicians too have to like pay rent, and it's getting harder and harder to like live in really high cost of living places like Victoria. It was sort of a low-key secret for a long time, but with that you also had this like sleepy nightlife and like not a lot of places to go, like you said, or congregate. And it's not just the venues, in my opinion. It's like the places like this where musicians go post band practice to kind of like scheme up how they're going to take over the world. And and it's true. It's like you need like if like cool coffee shops are great, pubs, little eateries, little mom and pop style places where you can like go have some food and like listen to cool music and just sort of get inspired. Like those kind of gathering places of all sorts, when they start to go, it's almost like a leading indicator of the nice life getting vacuumed out and thrown out with, you know, all the rest of it. And it's kind of sad. It's cool that Rifflandia has been able to survive. It's like a preeminent international music festival right here. And I lord that over my Vancouver friends. It's like they couldn't even, they can't get their stuff together to have any like long-standing music festival that's like worth going to. They're tried and failed. It's like the curse. It's like the Don Quixote of that city, you know, like you can't make that movie. You can't have a music festival that survives in Vancouver. Yet we've had Rifflandia for all these years, and it's just growing and growing, and hopefully that's like a positive sort of, you know, maybe some kids are going to see like a band or an artist that would have never have come to Victoria, and they're like inspired to start their own band because they saw, you know, Killer Mike rip up the, you know, the park stage.
The other cool thing about Rifflandia is that they do offer slots to local bands.
Totally.
And I think that that's really awesome as well. So you can go there and you can see those big acts, you can start a band, and there is actually a chance that in whatever 4, 5, 6 years time, with some stamina and hard work, you can maybe play at that festival too. And I think that's really cool because it shows investment in the community.
When I was younger, I was so frustrated that there wasn't a music scene for me here. I wanted to play a certain rock and roll, and like graduated high school, started going to UVic, dropped out fairly quickly, much to the chagrin of my parents. But I said, I'm going to go to Vancouver. That's where the scene is. And it felt like I was moving to Manhattan compared to Victoria. Victoria was very much late to the indie rock boom, the sort of like what we now call indie sleaze, like the Strokes and the Yeah, that kind of New York thing, which I was like really desperately trying to like assert myself into in some sort of like way. And I felt like Vancouver was like the closest sort of like gatekeeping door to knock through. And I did that for many, many years, and I ended up getting burnt out, and I got really disillusioned with music altogether, and I quit. And then in a roundabout way, I ended up moving back to Victoria, and it was like, whoa, this is so grown up. Like little cute Victoria is now like a teenager and is rebelling against that newlywed, nearly dead, dusty, sleepy, very sporty. And like if you're into sports, I feel like Victoria was like a real solid place for you. But if you wanted to, and certain types of the arts were like really, there was like a community there. But for like indie rock, I just felt it was lacking. And then I come back, and it was like totally changed. And I was like, okay, this is the Victoria I wish I had growing up, and I probably would have never have left if it existed. And it was so inspiring to come back and like be based here, and I'm proud to be based here. And I don't think I'll ever leave here. As much as I kind of fantasize about like living in different parts of the world, it would be great to have like a home here, a place here that was like my home base that I can kind of reset to, because it feels so good coming back to Victoria.
Yeah.
And who knows what the next 5 to 10 years, I feel like there's like another phase of growth that we're sort of like painfully going through with housing and like all that construction downtown. And who knows how that's going to change culture and the arts and the scene, as it were. Hopefully it'll improve, and it'll give, with a population boom, it'll give artists more opportunities to play. Maybe someone will start up a cool DIY venue. Maybe an all ages venue will open up. Maybe.
Yeah.
But right now, it feels I would be making a lateral move to Vancouver and paying way more to live there.
True.
And I'd be just sad and depressed because I
much
associate so much pain and suffering of my 20s there and struggle. And it's like, it's good to go back to Vancouver, but it's here just feels like I can exist here and be what I want to be. So that's what I meant. Like, I'm dyed in the wool, proud Victorian. And there's a scene here that seems to be like, I want it to succeed. Like the more musicians say like proudly, I'm from Victoria, BC, maybe it's like signals to that next wave of artists like, hey, if he or she or they are doing a good job with their career here, like maybe we don't need to move to Montreal or Toronto or LA or New York. We can exist here and have a career here.
I like that saying that like a city gives you what you put into it. And I feel like for me in Toronto, I went there when I was in my early 20s, and I had an internship at a music studio and at a label, and just had so much excitement surrounding the music industry itself, more than I do now. But you know, at the time, I made some good connections, and we've recorded a good chunk of an album there, and we've got some really great friends and supports there, and I've just had some wonderful music moments in Toronto that tempt me to be there permanently. naively, though, I know that if I had made that my home, I would be facing the same struggles that we face as a musician, especially as an indie musician anywhere, right?
Just with like 6 months of winter thrown in.
Yeah, and ice storms and who knows, right? Yeah.
The greasy jungle of a metropolis also.
Yeah. Yeah, but there is also just so much more diversity there in general.
Totally.
And I do find that quite inspiring. And I love that you can walk down the street and pass 3 venues with live shows that night and go and be inspired by other musicians more easily than you unfortunately can in Victoria.
Totally
just a smaller pond.
As much as I'm like planting my flag and like, everybody move here, it's great. It's like, it still has so much room to grow and improve. And I would love that for Victoria. For like, and I mean, this is such a deeper, maybe more like political city planning type tangent, but like there was that big report that someone published about like the live music scene in Victoria. 90% of that PDF document should have been about housing, because as soon as you remove that as like a viable, like, you know, thing for artists to like just like at Montreal, you can still rent an apartment for like relatively cheap, and you go back there. I mixed my last album, 2 albums in Montreal, and just talking to like musicians and producers and stuff, there's like, wait, how much do you pay for rent? And like, oh, there's still, you know, they fantasize about the old days of like the loft party scene and like the early aughts, and the Montreal scene was like just massive back then, but it's still pretty decent now. And it's a lot of it has to do with like musicians aren't pressured to like work 3 jobs in addition to being a musician just to pay rent and survive, you know? Yes, there's like the double-edged sword of being in a bigger city where there's lots of live music to get inspired from. I would just love to see, if you can't change the housing situation here, then at least up the nightlife. Like warrant that, you know, like.
I know. But it's true, eh? Like, oh man, we're getting really into like just
the minutia of it, but
Yeah, and I only have my theories about how to like fix, you know, an artist scene. But it's true, like, you know, more people come here, and the gentrification increases, and the prices of things, just living, increases, let alone owning a house or whatever. But then everyone, the art scene and artists and the starving artist is very romanticized too, but that's the first thing to go. And then after that, a city turns into a concrete jungle.
It's Vegas. We're literally a tourist trap for people from out of town to spend their money.
Yeah.
And they don't want indie rock. They don't want some burgeoning nascent underground scene. That's for the locals.
We'll get back to the episode in just a moment. But before that, if you're on YouTube, click like, subscribe, and hit the bell. A little goes a long way. If you're on Optic TV, check us out on YouTube. It's Island Sound and Story.
It's so important for like any city, big or small, for the wealthy or for the poor, to have a spaces like we were talking about earlier, where like you can throw without any like crazy red tape and legal hurdles, like get a temporary liquor license, throw a very responsible and safe place for like bands to play, or like have events, like event spaces on a grassroots level, like even an underground level. That I would like to see more of here, more than anything.
Just
like
a watering hole.
A watering hole, or like every scene that I romanticize about, like if you read about like the early 2000s in Montreal or even in New York City, a lot of those like crazy parties and like weeklies were thrown in warehouse spaces like on the outskirts of the city. There's like a few areas of Victoria that haven't been hit with gentrification yet that are just like industrial, like 2-story buildings.
Kind of here.
This kind of area, or like where Rock Bay is, you know, like someone were to just throw a cool little warehouse party of like 100, 150, 200 people, and it would be packed, and you could get like those cool like 3 or 4 band bills and like a DJ, and it's like covers, like it's not about making money at all. It's just about having a place for people to like let their hair down and cut some rug.
Yeah,
you know,
build community too.
Build
right?
community, and then you cross pollinate. Like, how many times I've heard Miina or Carmana, and I've never even met you. Like, where would our paths cross if it weren't for like mutual friends hosting a dinner party? Like,
Totally.
in a strong, healthy, vibrant music scene, we would cross paths way long ago at other friends' shows, because
Yeah.
they would be happening all the time.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
just at the Royal Theatre or at the Capitol,
Yeah.
but like the establishments that are like sanctioned and cordoned off as live music venues.
And not like also an area that's designed to be social as opposed to an area that's designed to take in live music. Like, you know, just a place to go and like gather.
And I'll chat with City Councillor Matt Dell to talk about what he's doing to keep creativity alive in the Garden City.
I grew up in the punk and metal music scene in the 1990s and early 2000s. That's how I got into it. From the small town, the Okanagan, I started putting on local BC punk rock shows in high school, became a relatively successful promoter in high school, basically almost failed high school anyway. Couldn't get into any universities or anything like that because most of my time was spent playing music and promoting shows. A lot of bands from Victoria, actually. Identity Records, which is a great record label here, from Tyson Yerrick's, who's a bass player in Acres of Lions.
Nice.
Small Man Records, a record label out of Winnipeg that had bands like Choke and Monine and those type of early emo bands.
Right.
So when I graduated high school, I wanted to get into promoting and playing music in a bigger city, and I moved to Victoria 20 years ago in 2003-ish.
Okay.
And became basically a full-time promoter and musician, primarily in the metal and punk rock scene.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my roots of it, kind of real DIY punk. I like rowdy music. I like loud music. I like mosh pits. And that stuff, it never really leaves you, unfortunately, right? Even today, I like going to metal shows and doing that, but I've kind of grown a bit more where I like a lot of other stuff as well. So yeah, I've been around the Victoria music scene for 20 years and in the promotion world for almost 30, even though I'm just over 40 years old. But I love it, and now obviously I'm a city councillor, so I'm kind of spending a lot of my time advocating for arts and culture, metal, punk rock, just kind of more shenanigans in the city and making it fun, and that's been a journey I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people who maybe were like me from Alberta looking at Victoria being like, oh, this beautiful, beachy, chill place. It has an incredible punk and metal scene. Like, I think people are very surprised by that. Why do you think that percolated here? Like, is it because, the yin and the yang of life and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple reasons come to mind. So the early punk scene here, kind of for me, started with bands like DOA from Vancouver, but No Means No from Victoria, of course, is one of the famous punk bands. I think that kind of, trifecta of Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, there's just a lot of unique West Coast culture developing there. Like, there wasn't like LA and California. It was a bit more, rainy, gritty, working class, and a music kind of comes along with that. The metal scene, I think, came out of the punk rock scene. Like me, I listened to a lot of punk rock, and then I got heavier and heavier and more aggressive and louder and more solos, and next thing you know, you're listening to death metal, and you wonder what happened.
But then it always goes like, I'm a fan of Frank Turner, and it was like that was his progression, and then it progresses so heavy that then they become a folk songwriter.
Totally. Yeah. Like the pop propaganda and the Weaker Thans that came out of there with John K. Sampson.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. So Victoria's always had a pretty great music scene, but that said, I think lots of places have great scenes, and we're lucky to have it here. It's kind of gone in ebbs and flows, but the punk and metal scene's kind of getting older, and there's a new scene replacing it that's a lot more electronic and dance music and things people are listening to now. And I think that's awesome. I think as you get older, you just gotta be kind of cool with how the scene changes, and now I'm kind of getting into the TikTok music world through my kids and what they're listening to, and it's pretty awesome to see that change, and it's going to keep changing. But Victoria has a lot of work to do to make sure the music scene survives. That for me means a lot of municipal government support. Like, as you know, the city of Victoria bought a music venue this year.
Yeah.
That's a choice we made to spend money on something to help revitalize arts and culture, and that's kind of my focus right now, is making sure that the city of Victoria really is doing everything it can to support local music.
Totally. And that decision, how did that come about? Because so many people know Herman's Jazz Club at this kind of testament, and I think it was within that 2-week period the upstairs Herman's had closed, and I know a lot of people like me and other musicians who are in the scene were really sad to see that go. And I think then that other inkling in our minds were like, oh wait, does that mean the jazz club is going to go? A week goes by and it's like, boom, City of Victoria has bought the building. How did that process come to be? How important that was for you as like a counselor, somebody who can make that decision? And maybe what is the goal with this, and what do you think will eventually happen? Is it just merely to preserve it, or is there to do anything more, and can you share that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first it's worth saying that one of government's jobs is to invest in things that have a public good. So we have libraries, rec centers, community centers, theaters. So we own the Royal Theatre and the McPherson Theatre. And then you go, well, where do we stop? Like, can we own something a little less than the McPherson? What about a jazz club? And in Europe, it's quite common that governments own venues, and particularly as owning a venue is becoming so much more costly. There's just not people willing to get in there and spend $4 million on a building. You can't make money.
Right.
So I met with the Hermans folks in my election campaign. One of my election promises was for the city to acquire Hermans. I don't know if I got a lot of traction, but obviously once I got elected, I started that process with staff and the other councillors. And then we have staff that go out and they do a bit of work, go, is this building, do we actually want to buy it? Is it going to crumble? And Hermans actually was quite a good building because a lot of it had been restored from a fire in the 90s. And then staff do that work and bring it forward and they go, here, council, this is an offer we can make. Here's how the business plan would look. And, in this case, they thought it was a good idea. And we went for it. And so pretty cool overall, pretty cool moment. And I got to say, I thought Hermans would be the scandal that kicked me off council. I thought people were going to go, what are you doing? Are you insane? You're buying a jazz club? Like, you're out of here.
I think that's the splash pads.
And Hermans has been one of the most popular things that we've done. Like, I had a guy come up to me, he's like, I hate you. I hate bike lanes. I hate everything about you and your culture. But he's like, thank you for buying Hermans. It is so important we protect Hermans. And I was like,
interesting.
Right on, man. It's I think an older crowd of people who grew up at Hermans. They realize the cultural value. And the building, I can't remember what the cost was, maybe $3 million, and for 5 arts venues right downtown. We're going to be looking for operators, hopefully not-for-profits, that keep it busy 5 days a week. And just like this building that we're in, just providing accessible, affordable space to musicians and artists is critical right now. So I think all local governments should be looking at buying arts venues, music rehearsal spaces, which are hard to come by, and turning them into I think an economic generator, a cultural generator. But Hermans has been a big win for Victoria.
And on that note of providing spaces, let's kind of tie the two things we just talked about. You coming here in 2003, being a promoter, being in bands, to now. I know in the past we've kind of talked about how housing and music are kind of tied. And what was it like for up-and-coming bands when you were first moving here, first promoting? Obviously housing is getting crazy, and a lot of what punk and metal shows do it yourself, are house shows. So maybe talk to me about what that scene was like for those DIY up-and-comers.
I would say it was a lot easier back in 2003 on. Housing was a lot cheaper. When I first moved to Victoria, me and my friend, we drove around looking at full houses to rent. And we had 10 full houses. We're like, we don't like this full house. We don't like this full house. And we didn't have any money.
You had a choice.
We didn't have any money. So housing was a lot more. A lot of houses had basements where you could practice and rehearse in. So my metal band rehearsed in a basement for a lot. There was a lot more jam spaces available because there was a lot of industrial space that was free and converted to jam space. So, Pro Jam Studios, who is Rick May, he's still around today. He had a lot more space back then, cheaper and easily more accessible. And then there was more venues. Like, we had an amazing place called Steamers on Lower Lucky Bar that did 7 days a week of live music, and a lot more options for punk and metal. And it's become increasingly challenging. Obviously, housing is brutal everywhere. For a period, it was actually a lot cheaper in Montreal, so a lot of artists went to Montreal, but actually Montreal is becoming very expensive now. So we're seeing some of those people come back. And venue spaces are challenging, and regulatory requirements are more strict. So there have been some pop-up venues in Victoria that have sort of run into fire code, electrical code, these type of issues. So it's essentially a constant effort, buying a venue here, helping a regulatory issue there. We've started a whole bunch of new grant programs this year, so that kind of helps people out everywhere. And you're never going to have the spot where it's like, we're done, arts is great. You kind of need to be there every month going, how can we make it better? How do we save this building we're in right now? The city gave a $340,000 grant to pay property taxes for 2 years. So 85 artists could stay here for 2 years. But that's only 2 years, and we're already working on what comes next. So I think it's really important that arts advocates are in different levels of government, because without that, I really think it's going to be a lot more challenging anyway, because artists aren't profitably motivated, right? We want to be motivating them for the arts, not trying to pay the bills. So it's a challenge, but we're working on it.
When you lose a place like Logan's, and if you don't know about Logan's, it was like a punk and metal venue, but they had all sorts of shows and very neighborhood place, very, very neighborhood focused, community focused, and very much for people just starting out or people that were touring into Victoria and maybe hadn't grown that following here and played that. When you lose a venue like that, what do you lose?
Yeah, so in the pandemic, Victoria lost Logan's, but we also lost a venue called Cop Rowell, which was our two, I would argue, our two diverse music venues. 7 days a week, live music, DJs, cultural arts and culture events. They both closed in the pandemic, really leaving nothing left. So I think for one, you just lose a lot of community. A lot of people would just go there on the weekend, run into friends, run into people they knew. That's what I would do. Friday night, I'm like, well, I'm going to one of these places. And so often by myself, and I'd run into people or talk to bartenders. So we lost community. We lost a lot of, I think, incubator space for bands to like play that first show. A number of my bands played first shows at Cop Rowell because it was cheap, and you could do it on a Wednesday night, and maybe 30 people would come, and that's getting harder and harder. But again, the economics of those places don't make sense. Like guys like me and you aren't necessarily going to pony up $300,000 each and go, let's take a gamble on a bar.
I would love to.
Like, maybe
I would love
if
to
we
do
had
that.
some really rich parents, but it's not going to happen. I think that's why we need governments to come in and go, you know what, this is going to be low cost space, or we're going to give you a grant to make it a little bit easier. Again, as we do with the Royal Theatre and the McPherson, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do it for more incubator art space. It's arguably even more important. So yeah, Victoria's taken a hit. Is it going to come back? I really don't know. I hope more people, I talk to lots of people who want to get venues going, but maybe they look at the numbers and the rent costs So has there been any good news stories on new venues opening? I don't know. You might know more than me.
We have Capitol Ballroom. We have some, I think Fernfest is a really good example of, a spot that's giving that platform to new bands. Like my band played, and when we first moved here, they booked us on the first year I moved here, and I hadn't even found a band yet. Yeah. But I had the name Baby Boy and the Earthly Delights. Shout out
Check 'em
to
out.
my own band. So yeah, I do like a lot of that, and I will say, so coming from Edmonton, as like I play more reggae folk stuff. This Victoria has been much more welcome to that style of music than Edmonton was.
Yeah.
Edmonton, in my mind, was the punk and metal place.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I went to house shows here.
Yeah.
And I moved here three and a half years ago. So yeah, maybe as much as when you moved here in 2003, you saw a lot of those punk and metal shows and houses. That's what I saw in Edmonton, but I didn't see here when I moved here. So that's why it's so surprising to me that was such a thing here.
Yeah. Housing affordability is brutal here.
Yeah.
And, Edmonton, a lot of guys, it's half the price, so it's easier for people to get together and have the basement shows, but it's hard to do that
$300 rent at one point on White House.
Yeah, so...
But it's beautiful Victoria. There's a reason that there's a reason I want to stay, and there's a reason that when I'm paying my rent every month, I know why I'm paying it. I don't want this to be totally about housing anyway, but I'm kind of curious how you've seen the music scene like evolve. So, obviously you're a punk metal person. What kind of waves of music has Victoria seen over the years? There's Current Swell, who's been one of the bigger kind of exports, not exports because they still live here. What's the metal band that just recently won a Grammy?
Spirit Box,
yeah.
Of course, yeah. When my metal band we were called Kincaid, we played a lot of shows at rec centers in the early 2000s, and we had a band, high school kids that would open for us. One of them was called Fallen Archaea, and they had this guitar player, Mike Stringer, and Mike famously went on to form Spirit Box, who really are one of the biggest up-and-coming metal bands in the world, but now like one of the biggest metal bands. They're like on the second line down on, they just did a Korn tour, a Limp Bizkit tour. They're everywhere. So I would think they're the most popular band Victoria's ever produced. I would say. Maybe Hot Heat would be up there with them. They had a moment where they were up there with the Strokes.
Yeah, truly.
But I don't know. Victoria, I think from my time, has followed classically along with world trends. We had a really great indie rock scene here between kind of 2008, 2016 with a lot of awesome bands. Maybe Current Swell was caught up in that, and now we're having a really great DJ and electronic scene that seems to be really emerging. I'm not too familiar with it anymore because I'm trying to party a little bit less.
But your kids will love it.
But I love what's going on. With Club Loading is one group, and there's a variety of other promoters like that. So, I've seen kind of metal, punk, into rock, into a really great indie scene, into a really kind of great electronic scene with a whole bunch of other things floating around there. So, is there anything totally unique about Victoria's scene? Not really, but that's fine. We're a lot of great people, great community, great shows, and it's just a beautiful place to be. So I think we do some really good outdoor festivals here would be one thing that's a bit unique. We have the Rifflandia Festival, which is cutting edge music, up and coming music. I mean, I saw Post Malone in Philip's backyard to probably 40 people there.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Well, what year was that?
That was probably 2014.
Oh man, so yeah, early.
Many up and coming bands that become world famous play Rifflandia. They go out and get the best of the best. It's not your classic music festival where they have the cliche headliners.
I think a lot of musicians are struggling to see the future, and the kind of cliche is that as an artist growing up here, you grow out of it and you go to Vancouver or you go to Montreal or you go to New York or LA. Is that what Victoria is destined to be, or is there a way to, make that living here, stay here, especially if you love it?
That's a tough question. I mean, obviously a big part of being a musician is touring and hitting towns. People have to see you. And even Vancouver bands are like, should we move to Toronto? Because at least in Toronto, you can kind of hit all of New York and all of that. So, the future that I have to say is I want to see the city being way more involved. We doubled our arts funding this year, which has a meaningful difference on way more festivals, way more grant opportunities for up and coming, artists and events. We're investing in buildings, buying venues. So that's kind of what's in my control right now, and a lot of it's in the artist's control. I'm not sure who is up and coming and who are those kids right now who are super talented, and where do they find a home. And I think it's natural if someone cuts their teeth in Victoria and decides to go to Vancouver because that's what they need to make it, that's great. And if they go to Montreal, that's great too. Maybe, don't forget about us and come back. But, that's everyone's personal journey. But I think Victoria, the future is pretty bright for arts and culture here. Artists like living in beautiful places because it helps them in the mindset that they want. And Victoria has a lot to offer for that. I'm pretty optimistic. I'm trying to do everything I can. And I don't know, hopefully I'll make a little impact on it and in the right way.
This episode of Island Sound and Story was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Ryan Hook, with additional production from Cam Welch. Technical production from Eric Hinch at House of Owl. And a special thanks to TELUS Storyhive for powering the episode. We'll see you next time.